You see what sending out them negative waves did, Moriarty?
But oddball, I did try and tell them, but they won't listen. I tried.
Sure.
But I did try.
Oh, man. Don't hit me with them negative waves so early in the morning.
But I can't force them to listen. I can't.
Always with the negative waves, Moriarty. Always with the negative waves.
Have a little faith, baby. Have a little faith.
But I keep trying. Oddball, I keep trying. But they won't listen. They won't tune in. They really won't.
Why don't you knock it off with them negative waves? Why don't you dig how beautiful it is out here? Why don't you say something righteous and hopeful for a change?
Tune in to Awake Radio for your positive waves.
Thank you for listening to Organic News here on Awake Radio, where we try to give you news that is organic. Thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, August 19th, Organic News here on Awake Radio. And we have Alan Goodman, who writes for revcom.us, that's a Revolution newspaper, where his work exposes Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people, takes on justifications for those crimes, and digs deeply into the nature of the special relationship between U.S. and Israel. In 2009, he participated in the Gaza Freedom March, an attempt to physically break the blockade of Gaza. Welcome to Awake Radio, Alan Goodman.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
So how did you get started? First, tell us how you got started in this cause of Israel and Gaza.
Well, since you asked, not that my own personal journey is more important than the situation in Gaza right now, which I know we're going to get to. And by the way, just as we went on the air, I'm looking at pictures of thick smoke rising over Gaza, more Israeli missiles hitting, more people dead, more people losing family members, more traumatized children, more destruction, more terror, and so we'll be returning to that. But since you asked how I personally got involved in this, I grew up in a Jewish family, and this was during the 1960s. And I actually, as a young person, saw Israel as an embodiment of ideals of enlightenment. I'd learned about the Holocaust in Germany, and that, I sort of saw Israel as a positive alternative to that. And there was kind of a turning point. I've told this story before, but you haven't heard it, I think. I was, 12 or 13 and in Hebrew school. And we had a kind of a civics class section of Hebrew school, which, was the 60s. So, and the teacher was talking about apartheid South Africa, which, a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with, but this was a system in South Africa that overtly racist, just literally a separate set of laws for black people. They had to carry passbooks to enter the cities. They were confined in large, I guess you could compare them to Indian reservations or the kind of spaces that the Palestinian people are locked down in today, called Bantustans, and they were being, massacred and shot down when they rose up in protest. For instance, in the Sharpeville massacre, which I believe was in 1964, and so this was a big issue, and many of us were concerned about this. And we were beginning to become aware that Israel was playing a particular role in backing the apartheid regime, supplying it with weapons, training, helping facilitate these massacres of black and other protesters who were protesting against apartheid. Israel was lending what moral credibility it had to the apartheid regime. And, believe it or not, Israel was working with the apartheid regime to build nuclear weapons in South Africa. And this was an outrage to us. And I remember some of us grilling the Hebrew school teacher, why is Israel backing apartheid? And at a certain point, you know, when his explanations grew thin, he said, look, here's the real situation. Jews, first of all, he explained that the apartheid rulers were actually very akin to the Nazis. They were overt white supremacists. They had, I believe, supported Hitler in World War II. And, you know, anti-Semitism was part of that package. And he explained that if Israel didn't support that regime, then the apartheid regime would reclassify Jewish people in South Africa from being white, the privileged minority, to being non-whites, you know, the oppressed majority. And I was just stunned by the immorality of that argument, and I blurted out, why would we want to be white, which, you know, had more implications philosophically and ideologically than I realized at the time. But I guess you could say that was a turning point. And again, you know, growing up in a Jewish family, there were ferocious arguments, you know, among family members. I mean, very intense. You know, a lot of Jewish families have relatives in Israel. And I just came more and more to a feeling that one had to look at the actual facts of what was going on in Israel. And then I started educating myself and realized that this whole lie about Israel being a land without a people for a people without a land was essentially genocidal, that the Palestinian people occupied that land until 1948. And what's called the Nakba, a series of terrorist attacks and ethnic cleansing by Zionist, you know, heavily armed Zionist settlers on the Palestinian population that drove a majority of the Palestinian people outside of what is today Israel. So that's, you know, that was kind of my personal genesis. And then, you know, as being a product of the 1960s, I saw the struggle of the Palestinian people, and as did, you know, many of my generation, is being part of a global struggle against imperialism and oppression and exploitation and injustice. So that's my story.
So how were you able to, you know, deal with family members? Like, I mean, are they supportive of Israel? And, you know, and you, right, by looking at the facts, I mean, you know, heaven forbid more people take the time to really look close and understand, you know, what the facts are.
Well, since we're getting into personal anecdotes, I remember one particularly heated, and I you know, I can't exaggerate how heated these exchanges were with a relative who was just, you know, saying the most racist, uninformed things about Arabs, which is really just kind of a pejorative term for Zionists, talking about the Palestinian people who had been driven out of Israel or who still live there. And he was just saying all this stuff that just had no conformity with facts. And finally I said, look, I am never talking to you again until you educate yourself on the actual situation. Go read a few books about what the real story, what happened in 1948. What were the demographics of Palestine up to 1948 when it was overwhelmingly Palestinians? Even after the post-World War II, you know, migration of European Jews to Palestine, it was still overwhelmingly Palestinian. What happened in 1948? You can read documents from the Zionist leaders about the horrible crimes they carried out that by any objective definition are terrorist ethnic cleansing. And I said, until you go do some reading on that, I'm not talking to you. So as you know, I'm associated with Revolution Books and hang out there a lot. And and I suggested he go down there. So he went down there. He bought like 13 books on Palestine and Israel. And again, if you've ever been in Revolution Books, you know, someone was like, oh, do you want to get involved? Can I sign you up? And he just, no. He took those 13 books. And I mean, I guess to his credit, he read them. And after that, we were at least able to have kind of sane discourse on the actual nature of Palestine. And then the moral issue. started to show up, which is the lesson of the Holocaust that never again will Jewish people be abused, no matter what crimes we have to carry out against other people, or is the lesson of the Holocaust that never again should anyone sit by and watch terrible crimes being committed. And this kind of leads up to, a very important moral point that I'm kind of, I've spent a lot of time trying to get people to listen to and think about, which is, it's a quote from Bob Abakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and it says, after the Holocaust, the worst thing that has happened to Jewish people is the state of Israel. And I think that pretty much concentrates the moral question involved.
Okay, so my plan was to now play just a few minutes of your talk from last Thursday at the Cooper Union. The event was called Stop Israel, War Crimes Against Palestinians. It was in Gaza. It was live streamed from Cooper Union, so I'll play at least 5 minutes of your talk.
Great.
We have heard and seen powerful images and video and personal testimony tonight. And the savage crimes that was carried out against the Palestinian people right now in Gaza. And we are here tonight, your city, in a country that enables all of this, financially, diplomatically, and militarily. We have a tremendous responsibility to act here and now to stop these crimes. During Israel's 2008-2009 massacre in Gaza, I stood in front of the Holocaust Museum here in Portland, and saying, after the Holocaust, the worst thing that's happened to Jewish people is the state of Israel. This is a quote from the Revolution. It speaks for itself. By the way, for doing this, I was surrounded by 24 NYPD squad marshals, their lights flashing for hours, detained, threatened, and issued a criminal citation that literally charged me with, hold up the citation, displaying sign criticizing Israel without a permit. There's a small concentration of the separate set of rules that apply to anyone who criticizes Israel as an academia in the public way and so on. Before I stood outside this museum with that banner, I toured the museum, and I spent considerable time in the section of the Holocaust Museum that had documents and photos and descriptions of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that took place in Nazi-occupied Poland in 1943. The Warsaw Ghetto was a densely populated outdoor prison where the Nazis locked down the surviving Jews in Poland in 42 and 43. Jews were not allowed out, no one was allowed in. Outside the walls, the populace was whipped into, incited to savage hate and fear of the Jews. Illegal smuggling, was the only way that people could survive. When Nazi troops stormed into the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942, they encountered unexpected resistance. Parliaments of the Federal Division. They retaliated by destroying the ghetto block by block, escalating in genocide against the Jews, and others were victims of the Nazi Holocaust. Well, I'm sure you're thinking about the extreme and ominous parallels between once you've seen and heard about what's going on in Gaza and what the Nazis did in the Warsaw Ghetto. But we're not the only ones who see those similarities. In 2008, Israel's Deputy Defense Minister declared that if Palestinians didn't stop their resistance in Gaza, and I quote, they will bring upon themselves a bigger Holocaust. He didn't just say another Holocaust, he said a bigger Holocaust. And how do you think the U.S. media responded to an Israeli leader openly saying they're going to bring a Holocaust down on the Palestinian people? Did you hear American leaders say, Holocaust? That never happened again. I didn't. In fact, when I looked into news archives, I found sympathetic descriptions of that incident. Fox News reported, you have to understand, Israel's frustrated with Hamas. Genocide? Another Holocaust? Never again can we allow defenders of Israel to pimp up the Holocaust to justify another Holocaust. The Spanish actors and theater people publicly raged and spoke out against Israel's genocide in Gaza. John Boyd flashback saying they were ignorant of the story of Israel first. We can't let people get away with that. So, you, John Boyd, are ignorant of the whole situation. You were a cheerleader for Bush's war in Iraq. You were a cheerleader for the weapons of mass destruction lies. You are ignorant of the whole story of Israel's work in ethnic cleansing. And now you are ignoring how genocide is going on right in front of your face. So shut up. Ways to interpret the lessons of the Holocaust. One is never again will I, no matter what crimes we have to carry out against other people. The other lesson comes from the perspective of starting from the interests of humanity. And never again can people be paralyzed by confusion, by denial, by feelings of impotence while terrible crimes are being committed. We must never forget and never forgive the crimes Israel has committed. Just as the Nuremberg trials prosecuted the leaders of the Nazis for war crimes and crimes against humanity, there needs to be another Nuremberg-type trial now. Defenders of Israel, shout at us. What about those Hamas rockets? Well, yeah, these are small, ineffective rockets going up against one of the most powerful militaries in the world. In the death toll, since Israel began bombing and invading Gaza in July, at this point, I guess it's 2,000 Palestinians are dead, mostly civilians, children, hundreds of thousands of desperate people are in UN shelters. Stop to think about what that's like. Defenders of Israel are make the case, and have gotten away with this far too much. Stop. They argue that the presence and existence of Islamic jihadist forces in the Middle East, like ISIS, that do not represent a positive alternative in the world, and yes, do enforce repression against
are you there?
I am here.
Okay, yeah, it goes on for like another couple of minutes, but I thought that would be a good place to stop it because you were just like plugging revcom.us and the Revolution newspaper. So what you were saying in this video, you were comparing what's happening to Gaza now with the Warsaw ghettos.
Right. I mean, just to complete the thought that I was in the middle of when you ended the tape, in addressing this argument that, you know, the existence of Islamic jihadist forces like ISIS that are doing very bad things and don't represent anything in positive, I was addressing the argument that that somehow justifies Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, and the larger argument that Israel is a bastion of enlightenment in a sea of intolerance and Arab hate, or however that is, is described. And along with the point that I just made, that we do need to bring forward another way in this world, the other point I was making is, let's put things in perspective. The capitalist imperialist system brought the world the enslavement of millions of Africans, the genocide of millions of Native Americans, and it doesn't represent a positive alternative to anything in this world, so it doesn't justify. Whatever these other forces are doing doesn't in any way justify Israel's crimes or U.S. backing for them, which I think we should talk about. But yeah, we can go back to the Holocaust. When I was kind of, I was interviewed by a number of people, and I can't remember if you were the one who asked me this, or it might have been the interviewer from Voice of America or someone else who said, did an Israeli official really say they were going to bring a Holocaust on the Palestinians? And I said, well, look it up. But, we can pursue that. If anybody has trouble finding it on Google, it's, all kinds of mainstream, there have been all kinds of mainstream articles about it. And in the speech, I encouraged people to, also look into the way the U.S. media spun that rather incredible comment. What did you want to follow up on? Or?
Oh, you were comparing the Gaza to the Warsaw ghettos. And,
right.
I mean, and, just also just elaborating as to the, the Holocaust being used as a legitimate, excuse to now sort of do the same thing to other people.
Right. Do you run into that?
Well, I had, Rabbi Weiss was actually the first guest that I had on that I posed, that I kind of, brought that question to. And what he came back to me with was the fact that Zionism was 100 years old and the Holocaust is only 60 years old. So Zionism was kind of around longer and happened before the Holocaust, which, I mean, I still think that the Holocaust, the reason why I posed it to him, because, it does seem like a likely connection, and maybe, the Holocaust gave Zionism its steam, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
well, I think it's more the other way around. But let's. I think you're identifying an interesting question that I wanted to go into a little, because as I mentioned briefly in the speech, I have done a lot of research into the Holocaust. And you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. It's silent in here, and so. There's a very in-depth article about this, and I will continue to encourage people to go to revcom.us, but revcom.us/Israel is a special issue of Revolution on Israel, and it's got a very substantial article, which I helped research, called Response to a Reader on the Holocaust, because after we put out this special issue, someone wrote to us and raised questions similar to what your exchange with the rabbi. Anti-Semitism was, prejudice and hatred and irrational fear of people and systematic violence by, people oppressed people who were kept in the dark by the ruling classes about just about everything. You know, the oppressive order that ruled Europe for 1,000 years before the Holocaust was very tightly bound with Christianity. And, you know, people were taught that Jews were Christ killers, that they were, you know, all kinds of, you know, essentially painted as demonic, almost literally. And so, you know, without going into it in a lot of detail, I mean, Hitler sort of seized on that and took it to another level, but it had existed for 1,000 years, and there were kind of two different ways that Jewish people themselves reacted to this. One was particularly after the, you know, the Paris Commune in 1848 and the birth of Marxism and communism and other leftist, anarchist, socialist trends, you know, a section of Jewish people, probably disproportionate to their percentage in the population in Europe, were attracted to different kinds of leftist and radical, you know, movements in opposition to the status quo. And then there were those like Theodor Herzl, who's usually called the founder of modern Zionism, who argued that the best bet for Jewish people would be essentially, and I'm somewhat, you know, compressing things and being a little crude here, but not much, essentially to go to the ruling powers in Europe and make this offer. We will go to whatever part of the world you want to colonize. We will be agents of imperialism. And he used terms, Theodor Herzl used terms like this. And, you know, in his writings, he said that might be Argentina, it might be Palestine. We'll have to see which global power sponsors us and where they want us to go. And so that was, you know, you had that divide among Jewish people in the first place. And then after World War II, when really settling accounts with the Holocaust should have involved holding the ruling classes of Europe responsible for that, as well as the ruling class of the United States, which essentially sat by, silently turned away a boatload of Jewish people fleeing the Nazis. This happened right before the Holocaust. And instead of holding those powers accountable, and if anything, exploring the possibility of those powers enabling, you know, a Jewish entity in Europe, if that's what people wanted. Instead, there was this move to encourage and, in many ways, push Jewish people to settle in Palestine, and then that takes us back to the beginning of the interview and the whole ethnic cleansing that took place to establish the state of Israel. But that's, you know, that's my understanding of the connection historically between the Holocaust and the state of Israel. But the moral connection, I still think, is one of, you know, how does one sum up the lessons of the Holocaust?
Exactly. Okay, Alan, we were going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and finish this conversation.
I'll be here.
So, listeners, please don't go away. Okay, I think we're back from the break. Okay, I was just gonna make an attempt to fix the sound problem a little, like you were kind of breaking up a bit, Alan, but I think we're just gonna proceed.
Okay, how am I coming through now?
Yeah, it was a little bit of breaking up was going on, and I want to make sure that you're coming over good. So yeah, just continue. Okay, I actually found your this article. Times of Palestine publishes op-eds calling for genocide of Palestinians. In what will hopefully be the zenith of neo-fascism in Israel, the Times of Israel published an op-ed titled, "When Genocide is Permissible." The post, written by Yakanan Gordon, called for ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people, ending ending with the question, if political leaders and military experts determine the only way to achieve its goal of sustaining quiet is through genocide, is it then permissible to achieve those responsible goals? Gordon's analysis of the Palestinians as a people is not surprisingly bigoted. Gordon claims Gaza officials and leaders are dishonest by nature, claiming falsehood and deceit is part of the very fabric of who they are and that will never change. The charge that dishonesty is part of the very fabric of who Palestinians are, and that is an immutable racial law that will never change, sounds eerily like a charge historically made against Jews that is rightly condemned as anti-Semitic. The Times of Israel eventually took Gordon's post down, but later ran another post that echoed Gordon's sentiments by Irwin Blank called 1 Samuel. Oh, I guess there's a link for the quote. It reads, Blank's post, like Gordon's, also made a religious reference to justify killing Palestinians, saying God, with the O missing, had demanded that Saul, or the prime minister, enter into battle with the Amalekites, Hamas and its savage partners, in parentheses, and destroy them utterly, if that means to the last child, cow, and goat. The last child, cow, and goat, huh? Sounds more like genocide to me. And it goes on a little bit more than that. But that's what you were referring to?
Things like that, yes. And I think, the really incredible thing is that, well, not incredible, but the important thing to confront is that this is not the Israeli quote unquote right wing. This is the logic of the logic of Zionism again. If you go back to these basic moral points of, what is the real lesson of the Holocaust, then it's not hard to see what the real moral issues are. I think there's a couple questions that are beginning to pose themselves in our conversation, which are, number one, what is quote unquote our country? And I put it in quotes because I don't identify with the rulers of this country, but what is your country, if you want to put it that way, doing, enabling all this? In the midst of some of the most horrific attacks on Gaza in this ongoing slaughter, when Israel was showing repeatedly, one after another, I believe there were 4 incidents within a matter of something like a week, where desperate refugees who had taken refuge in UN schools were getting shelled and massacred. I saw a video of one of them. In fact, there's a link to it from RevCom, where you can just see people standing out in what looks like a large parking lot, hoping to be evacuated to a safer UN school. And they weren't just, Israel keeps saying, well, they were hiding weapons under their desks or under their clothes or whatever. This was like a parking lot with people just standing out there wearing light clothing. I have to bring this up, even though it's a tangent, but this is like their claims now in Ferguson, Missouri, that Michael White represented a threat to a cop standing there with his hands up with flip-flops, shorts, and a T-shirt on, and they shot him 6 times and shot him again when apparently falling down in the head. This is the... Oh, you mean
Michael Brown, you mean?
Yes, I do. What did I say? I got his name wrong. But yes, I'm talking about Michael Brown and Ferguson, and I'm just comparing, the absurdity and outrage of claiming that these people in Gaza, these desperate people who are being bombarded, are, brought this on themselves, right, or that they deserve to be massacred because they're a threat to Israel. But then I'm also posing, what was the United States doing publicly shipping, tank missiles to Israel to replenish their supplies, because apparently they were running, you talk about terrorizing people with missiles. Israel is just converted every square inch of Gaza into a war zone. And I'm hoping that you and I will get to return to the question that we were talking about at the event, which is what kind of impact does this have on children? You know, the psychological trauma, let alone everything else. But the question that I feel we're kind of leading up to is, what is this special relationship between the United States and Israel, and why does the United States feel so compelled to continue to support Israel? So it seems like that's kind of a question that poses itself. You know, the United States gives $3 billion a year in aid to Israel. Even more strategically, it partners with it very, very closely in military technology development and military intelligence. You know, the two militaries work extremely closely together, and the terrible crimes that are being carried out against the people of Gaza are crimes that the rulers of the United States need to be held accountable for.
You know, it's just very, very, strange, and you know, the relationship that the United States does have with Israel. I started to read a little bit of a book called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. And, you know, it's really hard to read. It just talks about the decades of, you know, of course they're calling it aid, but by this time it's not really aid that Israel is getting anymore. It's more like, you know, like regular steroid injections at this point, to just, you know, continue to slaughter the people in Gaza. And yeah, exactly. I mean, do you think that the United States admires and wants to be like Israel?
Well, you know, that probably is the case on a certain level, but there's a deeper political economic connection here. The Middle East, as we know, is, you know, for decades has been the most accessible source of fossil fuels. And in addition to destroying the environment and making it, you know, putting the existence of humanity as we know it in danger, a byproduct of their addiction to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are what modern capitalist economies run on, and they are what modern imperialist militaries run on. And for that reason, you can't talk about the emergence of the United States as the world's sole superpower that it is today without talking about its domination of the Middle East. Now, that domination is, you know, being challenged by a whole array of forces, but Israel, for decades, has been the United States' main enforcer in that region. And again, this is something, if you go to revcom.us and then first check out the whole site, but revcom.us/Israel, you'll find a map that shows all the military missions that Israel has carried out for the United States in the Middle East, invading its neighbors, hitting it at enemies of the U.S. during the war. Israel struck at Arab regimes that were associated with the former Soviet Union. I already talked about Israel's close relationship with the apartheid regime in South Africa when it was awkward for the United States to be directly shipping military there. Another untold story, but that you and your listeners can look up. In 1979 and early 1980, Israel played a key role in the genocidal slaughter of 200,000 indigenous people in Guatemala as part of U.S. moves to suppress insurrections and resistance to U.S. domination in Latin America and Central America in particular. So this is, you know, this goes a lot deeper than the Israel lobby. I mean, you could give the world's most inept lobbyists the world's smallest budget, and they would still, Israel would still be getting all the weapons and everything that it needs. Now, you know, that within that relationship, there are tensions and there are complications. But the key thing that we have to understand is, you know, when the rulers of the United States talk about the special relationship between the United States and Israel and our shared values. first of all, as I said in my speech, I think this might have come right after you cut it, but among those shared values are ethnic cleansing and genocide. Let's not forget both countries were built on that. But also the extension of imperialism and capitalism and acting as a military agent for that. So I see that as a lot more fundamental than the lobbying, but then I also think your point about kind of shared values and seeing Israel as kind of a model society does tell you something about the ethos of, you know, public consciousness in the United States, but also the outlook of the people who run it.
And so, yesterday they had a rally at One Police Plaza, you know, for like, you know, police brutality, what's going on in Ferguson, and also what happened in Staten Island with Eric Gardner.
Right.
And, you know, the term, you know, the militarization of the police here in the United States, and also, you know, finding out that NYPD has an office in Tel Aviv, and, you know, that many United States police departments are being trained by the Israel Defense Forces, I believe.
That is correct. As I understand it, you know, it's one of these Blackwater type things where the actual people who do the training are quote unquote former Israeli military who are operating as, you know, private contractors. But you've essentially got the facts right. And I think, you know, who can look at, I don't know if your listeners feel the same way, but boy, you look at those scenes from Ferguson and, you know, the armored personnel carriers, the thick smoke being shot at people, the police with all this high-tech riot gear just blasting away at black people and other people who are out there protesting. You know, the police have still not, you know, arrested the cop who murdered an unarmed black man with his hands up. And the comparison of to what we're seeing in Gaza. I mean, and yes, the military tactics are similar, but, you know, underneath that, there is a similar kind of contempt and fear of the people being shot at. You know, you keep people enslaved, you oppress them, you abuse them, you demonize them, you subject them to the kind of harassment that the Palestinian people get, where they are just constantly being jacked up by Israeli soldiers, where they can't leave their neighborhoods without, you know, being pulled over by Israeli police and questioned, or a similar type situation that that's faced by millions and millions of people in this country. And I think, you know, a dimension to or underlying the similarities we're seeing in the military tactics being used in Gaza and in Ferguson, including what you're referring to, the actual training of these police forces by Israeli military experts who are taking the lessons that they learned massacring Palestinian people and selling them to police chiefs of the United States to use against the oppressed people in this country. Well, once again, there's that special relationship between Israel and the United States.
So
I was just going to ask, I mean, am I the only one who, when I'm watching these scenes from Ferguson, is thinking about the parallels to what Israel's doing in Gaza?
Right. I mean, would you sort of just narrow it down to, I don't want to say capitalism, because that's not what it is. It's almost like a war capitalism, you know, whatever makes money. And if they have to, right, genocide and exterminate people to make money off of, you know, weaponizing and militarizing and the companies that make all of these, because I know that a lot of the weapons are made here in the United States.
Well, you know, again, we're getting into kind of the parallel track here between the oppressed people in this country and oppressed people around the world, and even a certain specificity, you know, without going into it in depth. And once again, I think, you know, some of the, if you really want to get to the bottom of the history of of what this country has done to black people since they were kidnapped in Africa, held as slaves, then, you know, the sharecropping system and Jim Crow, and today the new Jim Crow. I think, you know, there's a lot of good resources, but I think revcom.us has some very powerful material that people should check out. But now we have a situation where, you know, to put it in the kind of terms that the rules of this country have, the kinds of dangerous inner city, low-paying factory jobs that they brought black people from the South to work in cities like Detroit or St. Louis, Chicago, or whatever, are, you know, global capitalism has moved those jobs to places where they can pay people even less. And there is an element of millions and millions of people, black people in particular, for whom the system has no future. This is why, you know, Carl Dix of the Revolutionary Communist Party has been emphasizing that what's going on with black people in this country is a slow genocide that could quickly become a fast genocide. And then I do want to, you know, encourage people to check out the work of Ilan Pape, who spoke at the event last Thursday. And his work has really emphasized, and there's an hour-long interview with him that you can also hear at revcom.us that, I know I sound like I'm plugging it a lot, but there are a lot of very valuable resources there. And in Ilan Pape's talk, he goes into how for Israel, the Palestinian people in Gaza, I mean, he puts it more eloquently and goes into it in more detail, but they are just people in the way of expansionist Israel. Israel really is moving to exterminate them. So you know, there are these very dangerous parallel tracks. And as long as we're on the subject, I'll just also note that, you know, I've been picking up on solidarity statements coming from Gaza. I've got to mention this. Among the solidarity statements from Palestinian people for the struggle in Ferguson, I don't know if you heard about this, but Hetty Epstein, the 90-year-old Holocaust survivor, did you hear about this? She was arrested in St. Louis yesterday, protesting the Missouri governor's decision to send the National Guard into Ferguson. So there's a very inspiring stand, and I guess she would fall into the category of those outside agitator criminals that they're.
Oh, Alan?
Yeah, we've dropped Jim. Want to go to a song?
Sure.
Global capitalism and imperialism is doing. Oh, we're on time for the next show?
No, yeah, you blacked out just for about 5-10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying there's both parallels between, you know, what capitalism and imperialism is doing to the people of Gaza and the black people in Ferguson and Missouri. And also, you know, people are saying that this is a common struggle that we need to take on. And I think that then poses a question, could there be a revolution in this country? If so, how would it happen? And again, that's, you know, by now you know where I'm going to suggest people go to get into that, revcom.us.
Alan, are you familiar with Ken O'Keefe? Kenneth O'Keefe?
Tell me a little about his work.
He's basically an activist from the UK who's been an advocate for Gaza. I believe he was part of that Freedom Flotilla. I know he was on one of the flotillas, and he did a short bit with Press TV just within like this last week, and basically said what I completely agree with, that, you know, we're next after Gaza if people don't really start stepping up, like, you know, now.
Uh-huh. Well, I think whether or not you, I, or anybody listening is literally next, there's still a whole moral question. Let me put it another way. Just because this isn't happening to you right now is no moral excuse for you sitting this out. You know, you can't watch what's happening in Gaza. Now we're kind of back to my angry speech at the forum, because, you know, a theme of it was, look, you know, don't say so confusing. I can't figure out what's going on over there. Don't say, oh, I don't know, what about those Hamas rockets? Don't say, oh, well, there's bad people over in the Middle East. What about Boko Haram there in Africa? But, or ISIL or ISIS or whatever they're called, and coming up with justifications to essentially for passive complicity. Passive complicity. Silence is passive complicity. Immobilization due to impotent feelings of impotence or, throwing your hands up, it's also confusing. That's passive, silent complicity. Terrible crimes being carried out in your name. And as a matter of fact, if you want to bring forward a positive alternative in today's world to both Western capitalism, imperialism, and these repressive forces in the Middle East that are particularly oppressive towards women, then you have to be taking a stand here in this country. People around the world have to see that people in this country are taking that kind of a stand. So I guess that would be my take on whether or not it's morally acceptable to just kind of sit this one out.
I just wanted to add that, it's not really complicated. I mean, it's pretty simple, and people that, want to make it complicated. See, to me, this is sort of like that gets at the core of exactly, what we're talking about. This idea that it's complicated and I don't know, the history and this, that, and the other thing is irrelevant. I mean, a 5-year-old, knows that it's wrong to bully people, to exterminate people, to genocide people. I mean, that's not complicated.
Yeah, I agree with your sentiment. When you hear someone say, we will carry out a bigger Holocaust against the Palestinian people, there's not a lot of nuance there. It's not that complicated. Now, there's levels of complication and complexity to everything, including, how are we actually going to bring forward a positive alternative in today's world, and, what kind of alternative system can we bring forward? These are things that people can do some work on. People can do some reading, and I've suggested resources. One resource I really should be promoting more is, as I understand it, that very powerful teach-in, which I actually was hoping to have said more about, but there were so many important things that we had to cover. But I do want to make a plug for it. That was an amazing event. I think you probably agree with me. And as soon as it's turned into a video, people stay in touch with worldcan'twait.net. They're the ones who organized it and are going to be producing the video. We had an incredibly moving Palestinian poet. We had young campus activists from Students for Justice in Palestine. We had Layla El-Haddad, the author of Gaza Mom. Jonathan Kutab, the human rights lawyer, made a stunning presentation. He started out saying in Israel they have a saying, and he said it in Hebrew, and I don't remember the Hebrew, but essentially in war anything goes. Well, that's the definition of a war criminal. And we heard...
It's not even a war, though. We've already established that it's not a war.
Right. It's not even a war, and even if it was, you aren't allowed to just massacre civilians wantonly. So, and Elon Pape made a very substantial presentation, and I've only listed half the people who were, there were powerful videos that depicted life in Gaza. I think this is going to be a really powerful resource because on one hand, it's true what you and I are saying. It's not that complicated. When someone says they're going to carry out a Holocaust and they do it, you have to stop it. But on the other hand, the more information we have, the more powerful and compelling a case we can make. And as soon as worldcan'twait.net releases this video, which as I understand it is going to happen pretty soon, part of it is that a lot of the activists, including us, have been involved in these protests around Ferguson and the choking murder of a man by the NYPD, a black man by the NYPD in Staten Island. So that delayed the video a little bit, I think. But it should be coming out in about a week. Stay in touch at worldcan'twait.net and find out how you can show that video to your students, to your classmates, to your church, synagogue, mosque, community group, get it on your public access TV station, and so on. You were at the event. Did you share my feelings about it, or?
Well, the videos, like the World Can't Wait YouTube is where all my filming, all the videos that I took are posted to the World Can't Wait YouTube channel.
Oh, okay. So we can start sharing and using those now as a resource. I feel like I'm the interviewer now, but should you plug your URL and tell people how to find them, or we just go to YouTube and search for World Can't Wait?
Well, yeah, World Can't Wait, right there. That's how you find their YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel, where I have extensive video footage that I plug every Tuesday, is April, like the month, Waters, Watters. So Alan, what are your final thoughts that you wanna, because we're kind of have like a minute left.
Well, I think we've been hitting on it. People in this country that enables these horrible crimes being carried out against the Palestinians, and we've only scratched the surface of the trauma, the devastation, the terror, the destruction. Water has been knocked out. 95% of the people don't have drinkable water from their tap. The Gaza's only electric plant was bombed by Israel. There's a whole population suffering from severe psychological trauma. All this is being funded and enabled by our country, the United States. We need to do everything we can to arouse people, to resist, to protest, to demand that this stop now, and that Israel's massacre of the Palestinian people and U.S. support for it stop now. And in case you missed it, you can get a lot of resources and also get into the whole strategy and vision of a new stage of revolution at revcom.us. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here.
Alan Goodman, thank you so much, and we'll have you back on again in the future.
Great. Looking forward to it. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Okay, bye.
Okay, folks, don't go away. We'll be back with Richard Gage of Architects and
You're listening to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and aware.
Now
We are live with Richard Gage. Richard Gage, AIA, is a San Francisco Bay architect, member of the American Institute of Architects. He is a founding member of Architects and Engineers for 911TRUTH. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. So Architects and Engineers for 9/11TRUTH now numbers more than 2,200 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. Are you with us, Richard?
I sure am. Hello, how are you doing, Catherine?
Yeah, I met you last year at the 9/11 anniversary and the big event that they had over at Times Square.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we had a lot of activities then, and we have a lot of activities planned for this September. September is the month that people are thinking once again about 9/11 and open, hopefully, to hearing the truth about what really happened on that day.
Right. So you get into. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt you guys. Your sound is bad. Let's do a recall because this is really important.
Okay, Richard, I think they're going to call you back.
Yes.
Okay, I have 4 bars, so there's nothing more I can do from this side.
Okay, it must be on my end then. Let me give it a recall and try it out. Just want to hear you clearly.
You're listening to Awake Radio. Straight talk for the awake and aware.
Come, ye masters of war, you that build all the gods, you that build the death planes, you that build all the bombs, you that hide behind walls, you that hide behind desks. I just want you to know I can see through your mask. You that never done nothing but built to destroy. You play with my world like it's your little toy. You put a gun in his hand and you hide from his eyes.
Okay, we're back. We just wanted to make sure that we had a really good audio connection with Mr. Gage. I think we're good to go. So you heard about David Ray Griffin in 2006. That's what got you started?
Yes, I was shocked to hear that there was an alternative story other than what the official story told us about the destruction of these 3, and I mean 3 towers on 9/11. Most of us haven't heard anything about the 3rd tower.
Right.
But here was Dr.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. We're listening.
And yet here was Dr. David Ray Griffin explaining that a 3rd skyscraper, World Trade Center 7, dropped like a rock uniformly, symmetrically, smoothly, suddenly into its own footprint on the afternoon of 9/11, about 7 hours after the Twin Towers had already come down.
This looks exactly like a controlled demolition.
Exactly.
And yet we're told by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that it came down due to normal office fires.
Right.
Everybody looking at that knows that normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper, and since they were few and far and scattered, they could not have brought this one down at free fall acceleration at all, much less any other manner. So this building drops like a rock, a bowling ball falling off the side of it. That means no resistance was encountered by any of the 80 columns in this building. That means they had to have been removed, and of course that implies explosive removal, as in a controlled demolition, which is exactly what the building looks like and what the other evidence leads us to.
Right. And, I mean, you know, just to add, I mean, you know, your average person can just tell by looking at that also that that's not, a fire would not bring a building down in that way. I mean, I remember when I heard about it, and my brother, who was still working in Manhattan at the time, told me that the buildings were completely gone. I remember thinking to myself, like, what are you talking about? I mean, I pictured in my mind, you know, like 2/3 of the building still standing with maybe, you know, from where the plane hit and above that, maybe having fallen off or something. But to have the entire building be, you know, which, you know, it was pulverized essentially, you know, didn't make sense to me.
Yes, and it doesn't make sense to 2,200 other architects and engineers who are on our website demanding in a petition a new investigation, one with subpoena power, one with immunity offered to witnesses to bring them forward, one that uses the scientific method to analyze all of the data and scientific forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony and video testimony, video documentation that exists. You brought up the implausibility of the Twin Towers coming down. Well, that's an important insight. I mean, these towers had 100,000 tons of structural steel in them. And what we're told is, by the official story, is that the upper portion above the point of jet plane impacts drives the rest of the building down after structural weakening at the point of jet plane impacts because of the fires. Well, that's not what we see in the videos at all. It completely pulls the rug out from underneath the official story. What we see is that in the first 4 seconds, this upper portion is completely destroyed itself, much like a controlled demolition, actually a lot like World Trade Center Building 7. It just telescopes down on itself afterward, and so there's nothing left to drive the rest of the building down to the ground after 4 seconds, and yet what we see is explosions occurring, just like 100 first responders described in the oral histories that the fire commissioner required them to give. And they say pop, 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 like explosions, like they were trying to detonate a building, you know, all the way around all 4 sides, and they saw flashes of light. This is all documented very well. And then what we see is those explosions, and they're hurling 4-ton structural steel wall sections laterally at 65 miles an hour laterally. Not gravity works down, remember. There's some incredible explosive force hurling 600 in every direction. You know, there's no pile of floors found at the bottom of either of these twin towers. What we see is a 2-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, etc. What we don't see is a 20 to 30 stories of floors that we would expect in any kind of a gravitational collapse. The concrete that's makes up those floors is, as you correctly noted, pulverized and into a fine powder, 100 microns, the size of these particles in this powder. 30% of this blanket of dust laying river to river across New York is composed of concrete. This is absolutely incredible. And that is concrete that's pulverized in midair, not after it falls onto the ground. And there are explosions going off well below this pulverizing concrete clouds. I mean, we're talking bursts of isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the demolition industry that go off maybe at the wrong time or whatever, but they're up to 60 stories down below these ejecting structural steel sections, and they're blowing up pulverized building materials at 160 to 200 feet per second. I mean, these are clocked by physicists. This is incredible evidence in and of itself, just on the video.
And just recently, there was an article about a company called Zim Shipping, an Israeli company that possibly knew in advance of the attacks. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a pretty recent article.
I haven't researched that myself, but I do know there's plenty of examples of foreknowledge of these towers going off. For instance, back in Building 7, the BBC actually announced the unprecedented collapse of this 47-story skyscraper actually 20 minutes before it happened. And they even have the reasoning. They say due to structural weakening by the fires. And again, these fires were few and far between and very small, as the video and photographic evidence shows. In fact, there's first responder Kevin McTadden, who is listening to a radio held in the hands of a Red Cross worker, and they were everybody was moved back away from Building 7. And then he hears 3, 2, 1, and then he feels the ground rumbling. He said like he wanted to grab onto something. Said he knew that was an explosion. So this is pretty incredible and damning evidence. In fact, some of the mysterious construction workers at the site, they're not rescue workers. There's nobody theoretically died in Building 7, but these construction workers are walking away from Building 7, hear an explosion behind their shoulder, look back, and then look straight into the CNN camera. And they say, that building, hear that? That building's going to blow up. Flame and debris coming down. That's pretty incredible. This is all in our DVD, by the way. 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. Just Google Experts Speak Out, and it'll come right up. And you can see it on our website, too, AE911TRUTH.org. That's AE911TRUTH.org.
So you've been working on this then since 2006, is that right?
Yes.
And so you've been interviewing witnesses that were in the World Trade Centers and or World Trade Center 7. You've been mostly focusing on World Trade Center 7, is that right?
We look at all three skyscrapers because the evidence is very clear that all three were demolished. In the case of Building 7, a classic implosion in which, by the way, FEMA themselves documents in their Appendix C in May of 2002, this is the first report, and they had made it, that there was intergranular melting. That is to say, molten iron invaded the steel and hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel. Well, thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. It creates molten iron at 4,500 degrees, which, of course, office fires and even jet fuel can't even get like a third or a half of those temperatures. So something created temperatures to create molten steel and sulfur, which is, of course, added to thermite. It becomes thermate. It becomes much more effective at cutting through steel. So here, the official story from FEMA has a very careful forensic examination of the steel that was kept, and I mean only a couple of pieces were kept from Building 7 because the rest of it was carted away immediately, within weeks of 9/11, to China for recycling. It was not saved. This is the illegal destruction evidence in a crime scene.
Yeah. And so, do you want to get into, what you really think happened and, why the cover-up and, is that part of what you're doing, or no, you're just trying to raise questions?
Well, we clearly have evidence of a cover-up. We have the illegal destruction of evidence. We have all of these hundreds of witnesses of explosions, but yet not one of them appears in any of the official NIST reports. An absolutely incredible omission of hundreds of eyewitness accounts of explosions. And of course, we have the explosive evidence in the Twin Towers with the pulverized concrete, the lateral ejection of steel, the squibs going off up to 60 stories below the towers. We have molten iron, in fact, pouring out of the South Tower prior to its collapse, just 10 minutes prior. This is incredible because there's no way that, given the official story of jet plane impacts, jet fuel, and normal office fires after that, can create the temperatures required to melt iron or steel. And this turns out to be iron. These meteorites of previously molten iron are brought up, huge multi-ton sections of fused molten concrete, actually, and molten steel, which is what they called it, but it's molten iron because it's rusting quite severely. And the molten concrete takes 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt. There's no way this can be accounted for by the official story, and of course thermite accounts for it very clearly. And in fact, there's evidence of molten iron droplets throughout all the World Trade Center dust, and these are small iron, elemental iron droplets the size of a human hair, and these are well documented by USGS and R.J. Lee, an environmental consulting firm, USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, of course. These guys are doing toxicological studies on the dust. They find up to 6% of the dust in some samples is composed of these previously molten iron microspheres. And, of course, thermite can account for that, given that it creates molten iron in 4,000 degrees. So why would they have used thermite? Right. Thermite is is not used normally in controlled demolitions, but high-energy explosives are, but they would have a loud bang and a bright flash. So in a deceptive controlled demolition, which these appear to be, one would want to avoid those loud signatures and bright flashes.
Yeah, I mean.
So thermite.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's not every day that you're bringing down a 1/4 of a mile high building either. So the use of the thermite, just makes it easier.
Well, it certainly makes it less suspicious, although there would be all this molten iron laying around. Right. And in fact, Leslie Robertson, the World Trade Center structural engineer, finds just that himself, calls it a little river of steel flowing. The first responders say flowing like lava down the channel rails, molten steel. This is all in our DVD, by the way, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. So it goes on and on and on, and the cover-up is incredible. These reports weren't peer-reviewed by NIST. They had no peer-review process from people outside their own circle of influence, and they will not release the computer input data, that data which they used to quote, prove, unquote, their theories. In fact, but we've submitted FOIA requests to retrieve that information. And they say, well, we can't give you the input data for Building 7 because if we did, it might jeopardize public safety.
Yeah.
Well, we're the architects and engineers who are here to ensure the public safety. We've got to see why an unprecedented destruction, third worst structural failure in modern history, in fact, is going unexplained. Well, NIST tried to explain it, but their own computer models actually betray their theory because they show that in the computer models that the building begins to actually tip over. They can't even get their computer models to mimic the destruction of this building, and they also have to fail in their computer 400 structural steel connections per second in order for this building to come down at free fall acceleration. So it doesn't look natural at all.
Absolutely not. And the fact that both of the buildings fell also, I mean, like exactly into their own footprint.
Well, let's clarify that. The World Trade Center 7 was a classic implosion. It was designed to come into its own footprint, and it did just about that. The Twin Towers were a very explosive demolition. So here we have almost 90,000 tons of structural steel hurled in geometrically, like fireworks, outward, landing up to 600 feet away, leaving only a two-story pile at the bottom of what we're told would be a gravity collapse. So it's a very explosive event.
So let me, have you ever been given an opportunity to present, your case to any like official 9/11 commission, or like what is their response when you challenge the official 9/11 commission?
Well, the 9/11 Commission challenges themselves, first of all. 6 of them said they were set up to fail. They were repeatedly lied to by the Bush administration. And the attorney, John Farmer, for the commission said, actually, at some point there was a decision not to tell the American people the truth about 9/11. That was in his book. That was published. We also have the 9/11 Commission report itself was not written by the 9/11 Commission. It was written by a Bush insider named Zelikoff. And this gentleman secured his PhD thesis in, quote, the creation of public myth, unquote. So we have every reason to demand and receive a real investigation that is not co-opted by interests who appear to be perpetrators in the 9/11 events themselves. We have indeed gone to every member of Congress with our DVD, with the petition when we had 1,000 petition signers, and again last September when we had 2,000. We have made every effort we can think of to reach elected representatives and media representatives, and we've found that the door is virtually shut. We did get one congressman to respond and write to NIST, and we didn't get any follow-up from that. We have gone to the FBI with letters, to Cyrus Vance, to the judicial system, the Manhattan County DA, with all of this evidence. We have also gone to the Office of the Inspector General overseeing NIST with direct evidence of fraud in the case of NIST, because they specifically omitted key structural components that would have completely invalidated their computer modeling results, in which they sought to try to show that their initiation of collapse hypothesis was made sense, which It didn't, because there were structural components that are clearly shown on the drawings that would have kept that specific collapse hypothesis from ever happening.
So NIST stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Yes.
And so their role in this 9/11 event is to examine all of this evidence, and I mean, like, they're supposed to be the experts. And I mean, like who do they work for? Are they
I understand the question.
Yeah.
Let me answer it. NIST is an agency under the Bush administration, whose leadership was changed when the Bush administration came into power. They are overseen by the Office of the Inspector General, but not very well. As we've just noted, Dr. William Pepper had written this letter to the OIG complaining about NIST. NIST brought in individuals such as Foreman Williams, who, from SAIC, Defense Contracting Agency, to oversee this investigation. He himself is an expert in the development of nanothermite. And that's important because a small team of scientists, led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, found international scientists from all over the world, actually, found in all the World Trade Center dust samples before that they had independently collected and analyzed the same red-gray chips in this dust. And these red-gray chips are very, very important. They're red on one side, gray on the other. The red side is composed of extremely small particles of iron oxide and aluminum powder in the right percentage to become thermite, interestingly enough. So, and these are smaller than 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. We're talking about nanoparticles of this material, and this is extremely sophisticated material. It's set in a bed of oxygen, silica, and carbon, organic elements that would provide gas expansion. In other words, making an incendiary more explosive, not just because of the extremely small particles, but because of this matrix that it's set in. These are in all the World Trade Center dust samples. They should not be found there. The high-tech nanothermite particles are made only in the most advanced, sophisticated defense contracting laboratories. And NIST, specifically with the head of the investigation, or part of it, in Foreman Williams, should have been able to find this material if they wanted to. In fact, NIST did say early on in writing they found no evidence for explosives at the World Trade Center. And later they acknowledged in writing, once again a year later, that they never looked for it. How can you find what you're not looking for? So we've got to have a real investigation that's independent and not corruptible.
Can you say the name of the man who from the 9/11 Commission that wrote the book that said that it was not the official story, what he was told? And you mentioned his name before, and
yeah, his name is John Farmer, and he's the attorney for the 9/11 Commission. And he said there was a decision at some point not to tell the American people the truth about 9/11.
John Farmer. So that's pretty...
And I forget the name.
That's pretty significant, not to tell the...
Yeah, it is.
That's pretty damning right there.
Oh, yeah. It's a call. It called for an investigation itself. In fact, one of the 9/11 commissioners, Max Cleland, resigned from the commission, calling it a national scandal.
Max Cleland?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just writing these names down. And so your architects and engineers that are part of 911TRUTH, how did you come to find them? How did you all come together? And I mean, like, they're obviously like not bought and working for the government.
Yeah, that's correct. They're independent architects and engineers, and I started the organization in 2006, and we had one architect and engineer for 911TRUTH. Since then, we've collected 2,200. They find us. They hear about what we are doing. We travel around the country. I've been to 32 foreign countries and 82 American cities in 350 presentations to groups of 100 to 3,000 people. And often there are architects and engineers in the group as in the audience as well. And we do a show of hands. And at the beginning we say how many people agree with the official story, how many are unsure, and how many are already in agreement with the evidence for controlled demolition. And of those people who are unsure or believe the official story, about 90 to 100% of them typically will end up agreeing with us because this evidence is so overwhelming, and you just kind of can't even argue with it. It's very easily understandable. People who go to our website and see the various videos on the left side of our website will get that immediately. Our website is A&E911TRUTH.org.
I just wanted to briefly mention, I mean, I think it's a pretty major feat. The billboard in Times Square that was up last year, just before 9/11, I think just about this time last year, calling for people to, look at World Trade Center 7, which most people were not even aware had fallen that day and was not hit by a plane, and yet, fell at free full speed at 5 p.m. or so that evening.
Right, and that's why we use that building, because it is so obviously a controlled demolition. We were so obviously lied to about it that it kind of wakes people up. It takes them out of their comfort zone and makes them willing, enables them to be willing to look at the evidence for the Twin Towers, which otherwise people tend to have a strong reason, set of strong reasons not to even look at the evidence there, because it's extremely painful to imagine that we were lied to about such an incredibly catastrophic event in the history of the United States, easily the largest crime in the world history, probably. So the billboard we put up in Times Square was 50 foot tall, and it said, "Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? Re-examine." What did it say? Rethink911.org.
Right.
The evidence might surprise you. The evidence might surprise you, and it does surprise a lot of people. And so this year we have a billboard going up in New York, right in front of the New York Times, once again, challenging them to cover this story, because it says, a quote by, I think it's David Sanger, chief editor at New York Times, they found no evidence to suggest that anything other than towers brought the planes hitting the towers brought them down. And so we said, clearly you haven't been looking. And so we list the evidence there in our website, in that case, rethink911.org, which is an alternative website which we use to educate the public, because we've given up on political leaders. We've not given up totally, but we've largely shifted our focus to educating the American people directly through this massive billboard campaign we had last year in 12 international cities, where we raised $500,000 to put up these billboards. An extraordinary response on the part of the 9/11 Truth movement, who will not give up in the face of massive deception on the part of our political leaders and our military.
And so you said there's going to be a billboard going up across the street from the New York Times. When is that set to take place?
Through the whole month of September.
Oh.
And this September we are encouraging people in the 9/11 Truth movement to use the brochures, which can be downloaded from our website, A&E911TRUTH.org, and printed locally for free. Downloaded for free from our website and printed locally. The new theme is 9/11 Truth, Good for America. And it lists all the good things that come out of 9/11 Truth, such as restoration of faith in our government, ending foreign wars of aggression, terminating the loss of our reputation due to drone strikes and extraordinary rendition and CIA-sponsored assassinations and torture. All of these things need to be ended. And the restoration of our economy, which was sacked by the aftermath of 9/11 with the $4.5 trillion global war on terror. So that's what we're recommending people do across the country, and specifically in New York, where we will also have one of the major premieres of the new movie called Anatomy of a Great Deception, which is an effort by David Hooper, who made this film in order to show, in order to save his marriage, really. He had gone kind of down the rabbit hole of this evidence, piece by piece, and his wife thought he was kind of nuts as he engaged in each additional piece of evidence, such as we've been talking about today, and he's putting it all together in his mind, and he's sharing this with the audience, and he's using clips from our movie, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. So it's a great synergy of somebody who was on a personal exploration using the evidence and trying to piece things together and prove that he's not insane as he connects these dots. So this is a great movie, Anatomy of a Great Deception, and we're encouraging everybody to order it and share it with others. It's available on our website on a pre-sale basis because the movie's not quite finished yet. But people can order it now and make sure they have it before September 11th. And again, that website is AE911TRUTH.org. So those are the activities that we're encouraging people all around the world to engage in, because regarding the brochure, 9/11 Truth, Good for America, we also have one called 9/11 Truth, Good for the World, because the world is severely impacted by the aftermath of 9/11, not just America.
What are your plans for this 9/11? Do you plan on doing anything down by Ground Zero, where so many? I mean, it's a very tourist attraction location where people still come and flock and believe the official story. And for some years now, a small group of 9/11 Truth people are down there with posters and all the information, handing out flyers, and I think they've been getting some good feedback from the public in just raising doubts to the official story.
Yes, absolutely. We have hundreds and hundreds of people in the 9/11 Truth movement showing up every year, and I will be there once again to as part of that effort. We have on 9/11, which is a Thursday, at about 9 o'clock, we'll be right down on Ground Zero. I think it's Liberty and Greenwich, the corner there, And then we have a press release very close to there. I think it's closer to the actual museum, which I think is the one at Liberty and Greenwich. We will be at 11, and then at 2 p.m. we'll have our own New York premiere of the movie Anatomy of a Great Deception that we just talked about.
Right.
And then we'll be marching up to Union Square for further activities on Thursday. On Friday, we'll be at the museum handing out our alternative guide to the museum, showing tourists what they will not find in the museum and the missing evidence. And then on Saturday, we have a symposium of speakers, including myself and Dr. William Pepper, our attorney who is challenging NIST. And we have family members and survivors coming, architects, and some other surprise guests. That's 2 p.m. Saturday to 5 p.m. at Theater 80, where the Anatomy of a Great Deception will also be. And so there's a lot of activities.
I also wanted to recommend people to read Sibel Edmonds' book, Classified Woman. She was, in that book, revealing a lot of things that she found working for the FBI of foreknowledge of 9/11 and, before it happened, and a lot of things that were going on. I read that book actually a couple of years ago already. And I really wanted to mention Michael Rupert, who has since passed away, who was another 9/11 Truth advocate. People could look up, the work of Michael Rupert, who, is no longer with us. And I first met him at 56 Walker Street a few years ago at a 9/11 event. But this year sounds like it's going to be really good because it's on a Thursday, and so you have the whole weekend to have like all these events.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting. We're all geared up for it. I hope everybody will come down to the events. We are putting out an action alert, in fact, about it today. So if you go to our website, you can sign up for our action alert so people can learn, your listeners, all about the events that we have and the evidence that we've gathered and the effort toward a new investigation. Simply go to AE911TRUTH.org and click on the button to the right, newsletter sign up.
Okay, I'm doing that right now. Do you need any people, to hand out flyers or help you do anything like that, like a place if people wanted to help?
Yeah, absolutely. Please, people, check on our website for the schedule. If you don't get on the newsletter, sign up and find out where we're going to be and when. We'll be handing out flyers, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, to the public, because a lot of tourists will come to New York on and around 9/11 in order to, I guess they have various agendas. Some of them want to learn more. Some of them want to pay their respects to those who were lost. Some of them want to protest because the truth has not been told. All of them will have the opportunity to receive lots of information and see our signs and our banners and our T-shirts and our hats, which we will be making quite a bit of visibility with.
So, you recently spoke to CNN, did an interview with you. And a pretty lengthy interview, which also speaks to, has the mainstream media, besides this recent CNN interview, had you on their shows and brought light to any of these issues in challenging the official 9/11 story?
Well, I hope we were able to bring light to the 3 million people who were listening to that 40-minute interview on the Washington Journal program on C-SPAN on August 1st, Friday. It was quite a breakthrough for us in the 9/11 Truth movement. We haven't had that kind of exposure on quasi-mainstream television. We'd love to know that all the right people saw that. This is the program that interviews senators and congressmen and others, and a lot of people watch that program. And as a matter of fact, we received, I think, over 70,000 views on that program, which is more than 10 times what President Obama's interview received, and near an all-time record high for views on their shows. So I hope that in and of itself caught the attention of the at least the management at C-SPAN, and that they're
and so since 2006, since the beginning of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, how many mainstream media have invited you to be on?
Well, I guess it depends on what we mean by mainstream media. Our biggest exposure, I think, prior to this was November of 2009 on Geraldo. Was that already 2009? But on the Geraldo Rivera show, we had Tony Zambodi, and one of our engineers, and family member Bob McIlvain, who shared the evidence for explosive demolition and the impossibility of the official story being true relative to Building 7. They actually showed Building 7 coming down, and we had Geraldo questioning that, 1,350 architects and engineers, they must know something, and encouraged people to check it out, which was great. But he didn't follow up on that at all. And until C-SPAN, we didn't have coverage at that scale. So it's been a long process of being in the trenches, doing the hard work, and getting breakthroughs like that. We hope for many more.
So I'm hoping that more people will have you on, because it sounds like it's definitely gaining some momentum.
Yeah, I think so. We've done over 400, probably almost 400 radio interviews now as well, and maybe a dozen TV interviews. There is momentum, I think, since C-SPAN. We've been doing radio interviews a couple of times a week at least, and we're reaching thousands and thousands of people. So I'm hoping people will do something with this information and not just sit on it. That's the key. This is a grassroots movement. It's not going to be televised very often. People are going to have to share this information. They're going to have to care enough about it to sit down at their computer and forward the AE911truth.org link to every architect and engineer that they can find, every friend, coworker, and relative that they know, elected representatives and media officials. It's just got to be the work of individual patriots who care, because our country, our very country, is at stake. If 9/11 was some sort of an inside operation, and all the evidence points to that, then we are in grave danger as Americans. Our country, as our forefathers created it, is in grave jeopardy.
Right.
We have to let people know what the information is, so that they can be kind of woken up and take matters into their own hands and tell their own friends about it.
And just imagine how dangerous it is with people not knowing, the truth. I mean, it's still, it's more dangerous, the fact that people don't know the truth. I mean, like, getting to the truth and getting all this exposed, is a good start. And it's still dangerous, even though the truth does come out. But the danger, I feel is even greater, with the truth not being out there enough.
That's right, because even the Bush administration and Congress and members of the media warned us shortly after 9/11 of the next 9/11 being far worse, all this fear-mongering. Well, we have no doubts that they have been planning additional shock and awe false flag operations against the American people, just like 9/11 was. Right. And perhaps the exposure that we've done about false flag operations in the 9/11 Truth movement has mitigated their ability to get away with additional such operations.
What do you want to see happen? The people get the information, we find out, the truth about what really happened on 9/11, and then what?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know what happens. I'm just an architect, and I'm trying to get to the point where I can do architecture. I've never been an activist. I was a Reagan Republican. I voted very conservatively. It was a rude awakening for me to realize that both the Republicans and the Democrats, the right and the left, are highly controlled, seemingly opposing forces in this country, and we've all been manipulated in the midst of our democracy. So I don't know what happens when that comes crashing down on a majority of Americans' awareness. I'm quite concerned that they'll be very, very, very angry, and I don't know what that will lead to. But that is no reason for us to shy away from telling the truth, that's for sure.
I just wanted to, you just mentioned, being diverted into being an activist, and I think more and more people are going to find that out, that, the career that they thought that they had is going to be diverted into being an activist.
Yeah, that's a concern. I didn't want to be an activist. I'd never spoken in front of people. I didn't know how to use a PowerPoint presentation. I was terrified the first time I got up and gave a presentation about this evidence. And yet it's just so coherent and self-corroboratory, if there's such a word, that it speaks for itself. And I found that the truth will speak through me as it does through many others who are willing to open their mouths in the face of these injustices. And that's all we got. We've got each other, and we've got our ability to speak truth to power, and we've got to do that because, like you said, if we don't, the danger is far, far greater of us going straight into I'm not sure what. There are those who have researched the perpetrators who have given us 9/11, and they have plans that are much worse than 9/11 ever was. And I don't want to go there. I want to expose this. So that's why I'm spending all of my time doing just that.
I mean, I think that, anything and everything that the government says should be challenged and questioned because they don't exactly have the greatest track record, of telling the truth. And look at the fact that the United States is funding Israel and what they're doing to Gaza. So, why should we believe anything that they say?
Yeah, there are plenty of lies, and we've exposed those lies from one of their agencies called NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, on our website. And I think it's a great starting point for people to begin a wake-up process, because it is clearly scientifically shown and intuitively that we have been lied to and manipulated with 9/11, actually from beginning to end. Once people read the works, the 10 books of David Ray Griffin, which lay it out in painstaking detail, but very easy to understand, and you can't possibly come to any other conclusion other than that the whole thing was fabricated from beginning to end. And people say, well, how did they get away with it?
Right.
Well, people should understand through the work of Project Censored at Sonoma State University in California, for instance, that 90% of the American mainstream media is owned by just 6 corporations.
Right.
And they looked at who owns those 6 corporations, and they're owned and controlled by the same groups of people that own and control the corporations in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry,
Exactly.
all of whom profited enormously from 9/11.
Exactly.
And the media is their propaganda piece.
Richard Gage, I want to thank you for being on this Awake Radio tonight. And architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, please go to Richard Gage's site. Please come out here in New York on 9/11, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I look forward to seeing you on those days, Richard Gage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, and I'll see you there.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much.
So that does it for this Tuesday, August 19th, Organic News here on Awake Radio. Next week I'm going to be playing a pre-recorded interview with Miko Peleg talking about his book, The General's Son. Thank you, and keep up the fight.
You're listening to Awake Radio. Straight talk for the awake and aware.
Our Cat Waters with Organic News. She always brings us the good stuff. And you're stuck with me for a couple hours. Play some pods and some tunes. Let me know what you want to hear.